The bustling halls of Atlanta General Hospital were always busy, but on this particular Saturday evening in September, they were transformed into something magical. The annual hospital fundraising gala had turned the normally sterile cafeteria into an elegant ballroom, with twinkling lights and soft music filling the air. Keisha Williams stood near the refreshment table, tugging at the hem of her navy blue cocktail dress. As a nurse practitioner in the pediatric ward, she usually spent her days in comfortable scrubs, not fancy dresses and heels. But tonight, she had made an extra effort, even though she'd rather be at home watching Netflix with a bowl of popcorn. Just one more hour, she whispered to herself, checking her watch for the 10th time. At 32, Keisha was tired of these social events where her mother's friends kept trying to introduce her to their sons. She took a sip of her punch and watched the couples swaying on the dance floor. That's when she first noticed him. He sat in his wheelchair near the opposite wall, wearing a crisp charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. What caught her attention wasn't the wheelchair, it was his smile. He was laughing at something someone had said, and his entire face lit up with joy. His brown hair was neatly styled, and even from across the room, she could see the warmth in his eyes. "Oh, you've noticed James Cooper," said Dr. Martinez, one of the senior physicians, appearing beside her. "He's our newest board member. Brilliant man, he runs a software company that develops accessibility applications." Before Keisha could respond, Dr. Martinez was already waving James over. Keisha felt her heart rate quicken as he skillfully maneuvered his wheelchair through the crowd. "James, I'd like you to meet Keisha Williams, one of our best nurse practitioners," Dr. Martinez said. "Keisha, this is James Cooper." "It's nice to meet you," James said, extending his hand. His voice was deep and friendly, with a slight southern twang. His handshake was firm and confident. "Likewise," Keisha managed to say, trying not to stare too obviously. Up close, she noticed his eyes were a striking shade of hazel. Dr. Martinez was quickly pulled away by another guest, leaving them alone. An awkward silence followed. "So," they both said simultaneously, then laughed. "Ladies first," James offered with a grin. "I was just going to ask how you got involved with the hospital board," Keisha said, grateful for the prompt. James's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Well, after my accident 5 years ago, I realized how much technology could help people with disabilities. My company started developing apps to make life easier for people in wheelchairs. The hospital was one of our first clients." They fell into easy conversation after that. James told her about growing up in Tennessee, moving to Atlanta for work, and his passion for making technology more accessible. Keisha shared stories about her work in pediatrics, her close-knit family, and her dream of opening a community health clinic someday. Time seemed to float by. They discussed everything from their favorite books to their worst cooking disasters. James had a way of telling stories that made Keisha laugh harder than she had in months. "I can't believe it's almost midnight," Keisha said, glancing at her watch in surprise. "Time flies when you're having fun," James replied. He hesitated for a moment, then added, "Listen, I know this might be forward, but would you like to get coffee sometime?" Keisha felt butterflies in her stomach. She dated before, but something about James felt different. Still, she couldn't ignore the small voice in her head wondering about the challenges they might face, not just because of his disability, but also because of their different racial backgrounds. But looking at his hopeful expression, she realized none of that mattered as much as the connection they'd shared all evening. "I'd like that," she said softly. They exchanged numbers, and James suggested a coffee shop for the following weekend. As they said goodbye, Keisha felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about what might lie ahead. Walking to her car later that night, Keisha couldn't stop smiling. She'd come to the gala expecting another boring evening of small talk. Instead, she'd met someone who made her feel both comfortable and excited at the same time. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. 2 weeks after their first coffee date, Keisha and James found themselves spending more and more time together. Their coffee meetings turned into dinner dates, movie nights, and long conversations that lasted until dawn. However, not everyone was as excited about their blossoming relationship as they were. One Sunday afternoon, Keisha sat at her mother's dining table, pushing sweet potato pie around her plate. Martha Williams, her mother, hadn't stopped frowning since Keisha mentioned James. "A disabled white man?" Martha said, shaking her head. "Baby, Are you sure you know what you're getting into? Taking care of someone like that is a big responsibility. Keisha put down her fork. Mama, James doesn't need anyone to take care of him. He runs his own company. He drives. He lives alone. The wheelchair is just a part of who he is, not all of him. And what about children? Martha pressed on. Have you thought about that? And what about the looks you'll get from people? It's hard enough being a black couple in some places, but an interracial couple with a disability. Mama, stop. Keisha interrupted firmly. It's 2024, not 1950, and I'm not going to let other people's prejudices decide who I can love. Meanwhile, across town, James was having his own struggles. At his regular physical therapy session, his best friend Mike watched him do his exercises. I just don't want you getting hurt, man, Mike said, helping James with his resistance bands. Remember Sarah? She left as soon as things got real. James gripped the bands tighter. Keisha's different. She sees me, not just the chair, and she's the most genuine person I've ever met. But does she really understand what she's signing up for? The medical issues that could come up? The daily challenges? James stopped his exercises and turned to face his friend. You know what's funny? Everyone's so worried about Keisha having to handle being with me. But I'm the one wondering if I'm enough for her. She's beautiful, successful, could have anyone she wants. Sometimes I catch people staring at us in restaurants, and I wonder if I'm being selfish. That evening, Keisha and James met at their favorite park. The autumn air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched under Keisha's feet and James's wheels as they moved along the path. My mom's worried about you, Keisha said finally, breaking their comfortable silence. James chuckled. And my best friend's worried about you. Seems like everyone's worried except us. They stopped near a small pond, watching ducks glide across the water. James reached for Keisha's hand. Does it bother you? He asked quietly. The stares, the whispers, the questions? Keisha squeezed his hand. The only thing that bothers me is that people can't see what I see. A brilliant, funny, caring man who makes me happier than I've ever been. Even when my wheelchair gets stuck in restaurant doorways, James teased. Especially then, Keisha laughed. Because you always turn it into a joke and make everyone around you comfortable. They sat there as the sun set, talking about their fears and hopes. James shared his insecurities about being seen as a burden, while Keisha opened up about her worries of disappointing her family. Maybe we should invite both our families to dinner, Keisha suggested. Let them see what we see in each other. James agreed, though they both knew it wouldn't be easy. But as they watched the last rays of sunlight disappear, they felt stronger together than apart. On their drive home, James suddenly asked, Do you ever wish things were simpler? That we were just two regular people dating without all this extra stuff? Keisha thought for a moment before answering. No, she said firmly, because all this extra stuff is part of who we are, and I wouldn't change who you are for anything. As James dropped her off at her apartment, they both knew they had crossed an important threshold. They weren't just dating anymore. They were choosing each other, consciously and deliberately, despite the obstacles ahead. What they didn't know was that their biggest challenges and surprises were still to come. But for now, they were content in the knowledge that their love was stronger than any walls society might put in their way. 2 years had passed since that first meeting at the hospital fundraiser. On a quiet Friday evening, James wheeled nervously around his apartment, checking every detail one last time. The table was set perfectly with fine china, candles flickered in the center, and the aroma of Keisha's favorite lasagna filled the air. His hands shook slightly as he touched the small velvet box in his pocket. After months of planning, custom designing the ring, and getting blessing from both their families, tonight was finally the night. The doorbell rang at exactly 7. Keisha stood there in a simple red dress, her hair falling in soft curls around her shoulders. Something smells amazing, she said, kissing him hello. I had some help from that Italian restaurant you love, James admitted with a grin. I wasn't about to risk burning down the kitchen tonight. During dinner, James could barely eat. Every time he thought about reaching for the ring, his courage failed him. Keisha noticed his distraction. Are you feeling okay? She asked, reaching across the table to touch his hand. You've barely touched your food. Actually, James said, his heart pounding, there's something I want to talk about. He wheeled back from the table and moved to her side. Keisha's eyes widened as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small box. 2 years ago, I met a woman who looked past this chair and saw me, he began, his voice trembling slightly. She didn't see limitations. She saw possibilities. She didn't hear prejudices. She heard love. Tears began forming in Keisha's eyes as James continued. Every day with you has shown me what true love means. It's not about what we can or cannot do physically. It's about how we lift each other up, how we face challenges together, how we make each other laugh even on the hardest days. James opened the box, revealing a beautiful diamond ring with small sapphires on either side. Keisha's favorite stone. Keisha Williams, will you marry me? For a moment, Keisha couldn't speak. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she nodded vigorously. Yes, she finally managed to say, yes, 1,000 times yes. James slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. Keisha dropped to her knees beside his wheelchair, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. Later that night, as they shared the news with their families, the reactions were mixed but mostly positive. Martha Williams, who had grown to love James over the past 2 years, cried happy tears. James's parents, though still adjusting to the idea of an interracial marriage, welcomed Keisha warmly. Only James's grandmother expressed concern. What about children? She asked during the video call. Have you thought about the difficulties? Actually, Grandma, James said firmly, holding Keisha's hand, we have discussed everything, and we've decided that love is worth any challenge we might face. That night, lying in bed in her apartment, Keisha couldn't stop looking at her ring. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Still awake? Can't sleep. Too happy, she replied. Me too. By the way, I was thinking spring wedding. Keisha smiled. Perfect. But James? Yes. Promise me one thing. No matter what challenges come our way, we'll face them together. Always, he texted back. That's what love is about. As Keisha drifted off to sleep, she thought about their journey, from that first meeting at the hospital to tonight. They had faced doubt, prejudice, and countless small challenges. But their love had prevailed. What she didn't know was that James had a secret plan brewing, one that would make their wedding day even more spectacular than she could imagine. But for now, he kept that to himself, smiling as he thought about the surprise that lay ahead. In his apartment across town, James looked at a business card on his nightstand. One for an experimental medical treatment program. But that was a story for another day. Tonight was about love, pure and simple, prevailing against all odds. 6 months into their wedding planning, Keisha sat at her kitchen table surrounded by brochures, her engagement ring catching the morning light. The wedding was 3 weeks away, and while most things were falling into place, something about James seemed off lately. He's been so secretive, Keisha explained to her best friend Lisa over coffee. Yesterday, I called him during his usual physical therapy time, but the clinic said he hadn't been there for weeks. Lisa stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Maybe he's just stressed about the wedding. Planning an accessible venue couldn't have been easy. Indeed, finding the perfect venue had been their first challenge. Many dream locations turned out to be nightmares of narrow doorways and steep steps. They finally found a beautiful garden venue with smooth paths and ramps tastefully integrated into the landscape. It's not just that, Keisha continued. He keeps getting these mysterious phone calls, and twice this week he cancelled our dinner plans because of medical appointments he never mentioned before. Their wedding planner, Maria, interrupted their conversation, arriving with fabric samples. As they discussed table settings, Keisha's phone buzzed with a text from James. Sorry, have to skip lunch today. Doctor's appointment came up. Love you. Keisha's heart sank. This was the 3rd time this week. That evening, she drove to James' apartment, determined to talk. She found him looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. Are you sure everything's okay? She asked, sitting beside his wheelchair. You've been different lately. You're having second thoughts? James reached for her hand quickly. No, never that. I love you more than ever. It's just... He paused, looking conflicted. There are some things I need to take care of before the wedding. Trust me? Keisha wanted to press further, but something in his eyes stopped her. I trust you, she said softly. The next few weeks were a blur of final preparations. The dress fittings, flower arrangements, and menu testings kept Keisha busy, but she couldn't shake her worry about James. During their dance lesson for the reception, James seemed distracted. The instructor had helped them choreograph a beautiful wheelchair dance, but James kept checking his phone. Important work stuff, he'd say whenever she asked. One afternoon, while dropping off some paperwork at James's office, Keisha overheard his assistant on the phone. "Yes, Dr. Stevens, Mr. Cooper's appointment is confirmed for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Yes, we understand the risks." Risks? What risks? Keisha's stomach tightened with worry. That night, she could barely sleep. Was James sick? Was there something he wasn't telling her? She remembered how tired he'd been looking lately, how he winced sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching. The next morning, she confided in her mother. "Maybe he's protecting you from something," Martha suggested, her earlier prejudices long forgotten. "That man loves you more than life itself. Whatever it is, he must have a good reason." As the wedding drew closer, James's mysterious behavior continued. Yet in between his disappearances and secret phone calls, he showed his love in countless ways, surprising her with her favorite flowers, sending sweet messages, and spending hours helping her address invitations. During the final week before the wedding, James seemed especially nervous. At their menu tasting, his hands shook so much he could barely hold his fork. "Just wedding jitters," he assured her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The day before the rehearsal dinner, Keisha found a strange medical bill in James' apartment while helping him organize some paperwork. Before she could read it, he quickly wheeled over and took it. "Just routine stuff," he said, tucking it away. "Nothing to worry about." That night, as Keisha lay in bed, she touched her engagement ring and whispered a prayer. Whatever James was hiding, whatever he was going through, she hoped he knew she was strong enough to handle it together. Little did she know, the next day would bring a revelation that would change everything, a surprise that would make all the secrets and worry worthwhile. 2 weeks before the wedding, the autumn air turned crisp as Keisha sat in her car outside James's physical therapy clinic. She hadn't planned on coming here, but his recent behavior left her no choice. For 15 minutes, she watched the entrance, her stomach in knots. James had told her he had a session scheduled for 2 p.m., yet as she checked her watch again, 2:30 p.m., there was no sign of him or his distinctive blue van in the parking lot. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Just finished PT. Heading to a work meeting. See you at dinner?" Keisha's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. She was dating. No, about to marry. A man who had never lied to her before. But now, sitting in her car with evidence of his deception right in front of her, she felt her world tilting sideways. That evening, she met Lisa at their favorite diner. The vinyl booth squeaked as she slid in, her engagement ring catching the fluorescent light. "Maybe there's a good explanation," Lisa suggested, watching Keisha push her fries around the plate. "James isn't the type to..." "To what?" "Lie, keep secrets." Keisha interrupted, then immediately felt guilty for snapping. "I'm sorry, I found another medical bill yesterday. It was from some clinic I'd never heard of, and he practically snatched it away when I saw it." Lisa reached across the table and squeezed her friend's hand. "Have you tried asking him directly?" "Every time I bring it up, he changes the subject or says it's just wedding stress." "But Lisa, what if..." Keisha's voice cracked. "What if he's sick? What if there's something seriously wrong and he's trying to protect me?" Their conversation was interrupted by Keisha's phone ringing. It was James. "Hey, beautiful." His voice came through, sounding tired. "Sorry about missing lunch today. Make it up to you tomorrow." "Sure," Keisha replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "How was physical therapy?" A slight pause. "Good. The usual exercises." Another lie. After hanging up, Keisha turned to Lisa with tears in her eyes. "What do I do?" "You need to confront him," Lisa said firmly. "You can't walk down the aisle with all these doubts." The next day, Keisha drove to James's office during lunch. His assistant looked surprised to see her. "Mr. Cooper isn't here," she said, shuffling some papers nervously. "He had an appointment with Dr. Stevens." "Dr. Stevens?" Keisha asked. "Who's that?" "Oh, I shouldn't have," the assistant stammered. "Please, you should talk to James about this." On her drive back to the hospital for her afternoon shift, Keisha's mind raced. She'd worked in healthcare for years, but had never heard of Dr. Stevens. Why would James keep a doctor's name secret from her? That evening, James called to cancel dinner again. Something came up at work, he said, but she could hear hospital sounds in the background. Lying in bed that night, Keisha stared at their engagement photos on her nightstand. They looked so happy, so honest with each other. When had the secret started? What else didn't she know? She picked up her phone several times to call him, but stopped herself each time. The rehearsal dinner was tomorrow. She'd get her answers then, one way or another. As she finally drifted off to sleep, her mother's words from earlier that day echoed in her mind. That man adores you, Keisha. Whatever's going on, don't let fear ruin what you built together. But as the night grew deeper, so did her doubts. Tomorrow would either put all her fears to rest or confirm them. Either way, she needed the truth before she could say, I do. What she didn't know was that the next day would bring a revelation bigger than anything she could imagine, one that would make her understand why some secrets are worth keeping, if only for a little while. The morning of the wedding rehearsal dawned bright and clear. Keisha stood in her kitchen, staring at her phone. 3 missed calls from James already, and it wasn't even 9 a.m. When she finally called him back, his voice sounded strained. Keisha, I need to skip lunch today. There's something I have to do before the rehearsal. James, she said firmly, we need to talk about what's going on. Tonight, he promised. Everything will make sense tonight. At work, Keisha could barely focus on her patients. Her fellow nurses noticed her distraction, but she brushed off their concerns with a weak smile. During her lunch break, she sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, the same place where she'd first met James 2 years ago. As she picked at her salad, her mother called. Baby, are you sure you want to go through with the rehearsal? Martha asked. You sound so worried. I have to know, Mama, Keisha replied. Whatever he's hiding, I need the truth. The afternoon crawled by. At 4 p.m., Keisha arrived at the garden venue for the rehearsal. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw an ambulance parked discreetly behind the building. It's probably for another event, Lisa assured her, but Keisha noticed her friend's worried expression. The wedding planner, Maria, bustled around directing people, but James hadn't arrived yet. The pastor checked his watch repeatedly. At 4:30 p.m., James finally arrived. He looked pale but determined. Sorry I'm late, he said, wheeling up to Keisha. Had to take care of something important. Before Keisha could respond, a man in a white coat appeared briefly at the venue's side entrance, caught James's eye, and nodded before disappearing. James, Keisha said, her voice trembling, please tell me what's going on. Are you sick? Is something wrong? He took her hand, his eyes shining with an emotion she couldn't quite read. Nothing's wrong. In fact, everything's about to be more right than it's ever been. The rehearsal began. The pastor guided them through the ceremony, explaining where everyone would stand. James kept checking his phone, his hands shaking slightly. Halfway through, he excused himself. Medical appointment, he said. Last one, I promise. Give me 15 minutes. As he wheeled away toward the side entrance, Keisha saw him meet with the man in the white coat again. Lisa squeezed her hand supportively. Should I follow him? Keisha whispered. Wait, Lisa advised. He said everything would make sense tonight. Those 15 minutes felt like hours. The wedding planner tried to distract everyone by discussing flower arrangements, but Keisha could barely hear her over the pounding of her own heart. Finally, James' assistant appeared at the door. He's ready, she announced, smiling mysteriously. Ready for what? Keisha asked, but everyone seemed to be looking past her, toward the side entrance. The man in the white coat appeared again, nodding to someone behind him. Remember what we practiced, she heard him say. Keisha turned toward the entrance, and her world stopped. There stood James, gripping a walker, the wheelchair nowhere in sight. His legs trembled with effort, but his eyes were locked on hers, filled with love and determination. I wanted to give you something special, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent garden. I wanted to walk down the aisle with you tomorrow. The world around Keisha blurred as tears filled her eyes. All the secrets, the mysterious appointments, the hidden bills, everything suddenly made sense. But before she could reach him, before she could even process what was happening, James's legs buckled. The doctor rushed forward, and the room erupted in gasps. What happened next would change everything. But that moment hummed suspended in time, a heartbeat between mystery and revelation, between fear and understanding, between the past they knew and the future they would create together. Time seemed to stop as James started to fall, but before anyone could reach him, he caught himself on the walker, his knuckles white with effort. The doctor moved quickly to his side, but James waved him away. "I'm okay," he said firmly, his eyes never leaving Keisha's tear-streaked face. "I've got this." With trembling legs but unwavering determination, James took one small step forward, then another, and another. "For the past 6 months," he explained, each word measured between careful steps, "I've been part of an experimental treatment program. Stem cell therapy combined with intensive physical therapy." Keisha stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth, as James continued both his walk and his explanation. "Dr. Stevens, the specialist I've been seeing, you warned me the success rate was only 30%. I didn't want to get your hopes up. I couldn't bear to see disappointment in your eyes if it didn't work." By now, everyone in the garden was crying. Lissa held on to Keisha's mother, who had collapsed into a chair, her hands clasped in prayer. "The first 3 months were hell," James continued, now halfway to Keisha. "Pain like I'd never felt before. Some days, I wanted to quit, but then I'd look at your picture, think about our wedding day, and somehow find the strength to continue." His legs shook with each step, but his voice grew stronger. "2 months ago, I felt my first toe movement. Last month, I stood for the first time in 5 years. Last week, I took my first independent steps." Finally, James stood directly in front of Keisha. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort, but his eyes shone with love and triumph. "I wanted to surprise you, to walk down the aisle with you tomorrow, to dance with you at our reception, to start our new life together standing by your side." Keisha reached out to touch his face, her hand trembling. All those secret appointments, the mysterious phone calls, every single one was for this, James confirmed. "The hardest part was keeping it from you, especially when I saw you worried, saw the doubt in your eyes. But I wanted this moment to be perfect." The doctor stepped forward then, explaining to everyone, "What James has accomplished is remarkable. Most patients take years to achieve this level of progress. His determination, his will to walk again, it's unprecedented in my career." Keisha finally found her voice. "But the risks, what you must have gone through?" James took her hands in his, standing straighter now. "You were worth every second of pain, every moment of uncertainty. When we met, you saw past my wheelchair to who I really was. You loved me completely, unconditionally. This was my way of showing you that love can truly move mountains, or in my case, move legs that haven't worked in 5 years." Unable to hold back any longer, Keisha threw her arms around him. For the first time in their relationship, James hugged her back while standing on his own 2 feet. The garden erupted in applause. Martha Williams sobbed openly, while Lissa tried unsuccessfully to fix her running mascara. Even the pastor wiped away tears. "Tomorrow," James whispered in Keisha's ear as they embraced, "when you walk down the aisle, I'll be walking towards you. And every step I take will be a testament to the power of our love." Dr. Stevens eventually insisted James return to his wheelchair. He needed to conserve his strength for the wedding. As he sat down, Keisha noticed something else, a small wrapped package in the chair. "One more surprise," James said softly, handing it to her. Inside was a pair of dancing shoes. "For our first dance tomorrow," he explained. "I promised you a wheelchair dance, but I think we might need to change our plans." As the sun set on the garden, casting a golden glow over the scene, Keisha finally understood that sometimes the biggest miracles come wrapped in the most mysterious packages. The wedding day dawned picture perfect. At the garden venue, white roses and blue hydrangeas lined the aisle where, in just a few hours, 2 lives would join as one. In the bridal suite, Keisha sat before the mirror as her mother adjusted her veil. The white dress cascaded around her like a waterfall, tiny crystals catching the morning light. "Ready, baby?" Martha asked, her eyes glistening with tears. "More than ever," Keisha replied, thinking of James and his incredible journey to this moment. Meanwhile, in the groom's room, James stood before a full-length mirror, supported by his father. His new legs, growing stronger by the day, were dressed in perfectly tailored pants. Dr. Stevens made final checks, ensuring he was ready for the ceremony. "Remember," the doctor advised, "take it slow. This isn't a race." James nodded, his eyes fixed on his reflection. 5 years in a wheelchair had made this moment seem impossible. Yet here he stood, about to walk toward his bride. The garden filled with guests, their excited whispers floating on the breeze. Most didn't know about James's surprise. They expected to see him in his wheelchair. The medical team waited discreetly nearby, ready if needed. As the music began, James took his position at the altar, standing tall with a walker disguised with white flowers. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by scattered applause and tears. Then the bridal march started, and all eyes turned to see Keisha. She appeared at the garden entrance, radiant in white, her father at her side. When she saw James standing there, waiting for her, her eyes filled with tears of joy. Each step down the aisle felt magical. James stood stronger with each passing moment, drawing strength from Keisha's approaching smile. When she finally reached him, he let go of the walker and took her hands in his. "We stand here today," the pastor began, emphasizing the word stand with a knowing smile, "to join these two souls in marriage." The ceremony was beautiful, but the most touching moment came during the vows. James, standing unassisted now, spoke first. "Keisha, you saw me when others looked away. You loved me completely, wheelchair and all. Every step I take today is powered by that love. I promise to walk beside you through whatever life brings, to support you as you've supported me, to love you more with each passing day." Keisha's voice trembled as she responded, "James, your strength, your determination, your love, they humble me. You've shown me that nothing is impossible when two hearts believe. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face every challenge together, to love you completely, standing, sitting, or dancing." After they were pronounced husband and wife, James took his first steps as a married man, walking hand in hand with Keisha back down the aisle while their guests cheered. At the reception, they surprised everyone with their first dance. No wheelchair, no walker, just two people in love, swaying to their favorite song. James's steps were slow but sure, each movement a testament to months of secret preparation and years of unwavering love. Later that evening, as they shared a quiet moment in the garden, Keisha asked, "Any more surprises I should know about?" James smiled, pulling her close. "Just one. Remember that community health clinic you've always dreamed of opening? I bought a building last month. It needs work, but with your medical expertise and my software company's resources." Keisha gasped, happy tears forming again. "You didn't." "I did, because you taught me that love means supporting each other's dreams, no matter how impossible they seem." As they danced under the stars, their guests watching in wonder, James and Keisha knew they had started something special. Their story wasn't just about a miracle of medicine or the power of determination. It was about two people who chose love over fear, hope over doubt, and faith over prejudice. And as the night drew to a close, they realized this wasn't just an ending to their courtship. It was the beginning of their greatest adventure together.